This is a prescription for market downturns, something that if you invest in the stock market, you will run into from time to time. Now, there are things that I think that you need to know to deal with market downturns, and I'm going to walk through that. Number one is understand the idea of diversification. Diversification in general, you'll hear me say, is owning things that tend to move in dissimilar fashion. They don't move together. And it's the idea of bathing suit sales and winter coat sales. You often hear me say that. Now, stocks and bonds tend to be the most dissimilar. They tend to move in the most dissimilar fashion because they're the most different from each other. And stock segments, you'll find, you'll have large companies, small companies, different asset classes. They often move in dissimilar fashion, but not always. A lot of times you'll have a market downturn and they may actually move together with each other. They might have a high correlation at certain periods in time. Now, stocks historically have moved together when downturns occur. A lot of times you'll find that'll happen, a big market downturn, and they'll go down together, but they won't necessarily come back together. Important to understand that. And this is why we own bonds. They're our safety net, something that holds value when markets are going down together. Now, downturns really are a test for investors. And this is where investors are separated from speculators. Now, we don't like to think of ourselves as speculators. We like to think of ourselves as protecting ourselves when we get out during a market downturn. But it's really speculation because what happens is I'm market timing. I'm assuming that when something goes down, that it's going to continue to go down. Or I'm assuming on the other side, if something's going up, it's going to continue to go up. And neither are really true because markets tend to be a bit random in the short run. Now, sellers usually end up enriching those that buy from them. Because if you think about it, when you're going through a market downturn, you're selling to somebody. And it's typically somebody with intestinal fortitude, willing to put up with the market uncertainties. And they tend to be well rewarded for that. Now, research on investor returns for nearly 40 years shows that investors haven't been getting really great returns, no matter what study you look at, is because they're not passing this test. If we look at markets, one of the things I try to tell people is, there's some test prep that can be done here. Number one, recognize that market downturns are normal. We talk about how 5% downturns, they happen about 3 times a year. If we look at 10% downturns, about once a year. That's a big downturn, 10%, about once a year. It's fairly normal. And about every 3 years for 15% downturns, and about every 6 years for 20% downturns. So recognize it's a fairly normal thing. And also recognize that they don't typically last all that long. The average length for downturns is typically in days and not years. So keep that in mind when you're going through one. It's fairly normal and they don't last forever. Now, also recognize in your test prep that your brain necessarily isn't going to be your friend when it comes to investing. We have this part of our brain called the amygdala, and that's our fear center, and that gets activated during a downturn. And it tends to cause us to do one of 3 things: either fight, flee, so it's fight, flight, or we just freeze. Now, fight is, you might have somebody that, market downturn, they're going to fight. So what are they doing? They're going, I'm going to buy. And, they might be buying into a further downturn. Flight is where people go, oh my goodness, I'm getting out. I got to get out. This is scary. And then they run, they sell, and they hurt themselves that way. Freeze is where somebody just goes and freezes up and does nothing. Well, when you have a downturn, there ought to be something going on in the way you rebalance the portfolio and the way the portfolio is being managed. So you don't just necessarily do any of those 3 things. They're not great answers. Your best study aid, really, when it comes to passing the test, is education. You'll often hear me say that I plus E, your instincts and your emotions. So instinct, run away from pain, go toward pleasure. Emotion, greed and fear, tend to be magnified by the media. And they tend to outweigh the cognitive part of your brain, the thinking part of your brain. And what we want to do is we want to build the thinking part of our brain to deal with that. There's some really interesting research. A guy named Daniel Kahneman actually had done some research on brains. And he's got this book, it's Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. And he talks about how quite often you have the stimulus comes up. And if it's a scary stimulus, it'll come up and it'll go straight to the amygdala, the fear center of our brain. And that's where your fast thinking comes from. It's immediate. You got to react. You got to run from danger and so on and so forth. And then you got the second part of your brain, which is the thinking part of your brain, the frontal cortex. That's where slow thinking tends to happen. So you'll typically have that really fast neural pathway, and then you don't tend to go into the thinking mode quite as fast. So this is why we have so many problems with investors shooting themselves in the foot, is because of the way the brain actually works. So how do we fix that? Well, number one is you maybe go out and take a walk when you feel kind of nervous or scared or when things are bothering you. Get out there and enjoy nature some. It slows down your thinking some so that you can get into the cognitive part of your brain. Another thing, turn off the TV. Turn off the social media. They're not your friends when it comes to investing. Another thing, ignore the experts who are making predictions about the stock market. Recognize they are just trying to make a name for themselves, and they're not necessarily out there to help you. And if they knew where the market was going to go, they probably wouldn't tell you. Watch our videos. Watch our videos on the website. Our podcast is something that you can subscribe to. Great way to keep current on what's going on and what's happening in the investing world. And remember that if there were no downturns, then stocks would provide no higher returns than CDs did. Investors, in order to put up with the market ups and downs, they need to have some hope of reward, and that's why historically stocks have provided a much higher return than fixed income investments. Remember, you hear me say it takes about 150 years for money to double after inflation in fixed income investments, where it's typically less than 10 years for the stock market. So recognize that's why there is that big difference. Now, when it comes to education and communication, we do a lot of it. Number one, you got the radio show. Saturdays from 3 to 6, you can tune in every week. It's news, what's going on, and just good, solid information about investing markets and financial planning in general. Another thing is the videos and the blog on the website, paulwinkler.com. You can just go straight there and you can find all kinds of stuff there. And you've got my book, Confident Investing. So this is all about how markets work, where returns come from, academics, why the media isn't your friend is really a big part of this. And the other thing is a new thing that we've got is it's a text line. And you text the word STAT, S-T-A-T, to this line, short for statistics and stat as in fast, to 615-808-8543. And what we're going to be doing is when we do new videos like this, we'll shoot it straight to your phone. You get it right away, right off the bat. So it's a great way to stay up to date on what's going on and build that cognitive part of your brain, which is your only hope of overcoming the instincts plus the emotions and the media. So hope this helps. Catch you next time.